Hope my screen is visible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So right now I'm just sharing the IDE. Hope it's visible to you all. Okay. Okay. So I welcome you all for the day 2 of the week 3 session. Hope you would have done a bit of practice from what we did yesterday or what we learned yesterday. At least you should have gone through the recordings once so that by now you would have got some idea of what we are doing with Spring Jdbc. In continuation with yesterday's discussion, so let's move forward and understand more in detail topics like the transaction managements, and we'll be discussing about the batch updates and so on. Now, before we get into the batch updates, I guess yesterday we left out with few topics, that's update and delete, that we will try to complete right now. And then we'll move to the next stage of retrieving the data as a bulk of data or a specific constraint oriented data which we can retrieve using select statement. So yesterday we had this customer DAO, and we are done with the insertion of records, right? Insert into customer. Now we have to look out for the update, delete, find all customers, and find customer by name. So let's go back to our table once and see that we have the records. Use American Express. So I guess this is what the 4 records that we inserted yesterday. We'll try to manipulate this with the help of data manipulation language. We did a job of insert. Now let's say, for example, I want to update the address of this customer. So we have a customer ID. So how do we go forward in updating this data? So that's what which we are going to see right now. So just a quick refresh of what we did yesterday. We used the Jdbc template and we used this update method, right? And here we furnished the insert query and followed with the parameter for the placeholders. These are placeholders for which we need to provide the parameters. To provide the parameters, how many ever parameter that you have based on the number of placeholders, we need to create an array of object array, and feed in the values. So this is one way in which we can provide the value to this placeholders. The other way is you can remove the placeholders and you can give a static, bind the variable directly here by using splitting of this string. That seems to be a little complex, so that's why I'm not going through this channel. It's better to follow with the parameters. Dynamically, you can feed in. So similar approach is what which we are going to follow for the update as well. So I guess we'll try to capture this code again and do a little bit of manipulations. I don't want to spend much time there. So just going to this. Okay, so here again it's going to be an update. So I don't want this row counts. And temporarily let's be written true. So here we need to give the update statement. Update customer set cust_address equals question mark. That's your placeholder where we are going to feed in the value to this placeholder along with the where condition. To which customer do you want to update this address? That's what which we are trying to figure out right now. So it's for the customer ID of 1001. I want to change the address where the customer have been shifted from Chennai to somewhere, let's say Delhi. So to do the updation work, we need to apply the where condition. So where the particular customer is identified with the help of customer ID equals question mark. So for both the places, I've dropped in the question mark, understanding that we have two placeholders, right? And the two placeholders have to be filled in with the value by using the same approach that we followed for insert statement as well. So here, instead of 3 parameters, we are just going to follow with 2 parameters, parameter 1 and parameter 2. Okay, we don't need the third parameter, but that too, the first parameter is going to be for the first placeholder, and that's none other than the address, right? The second parameter is going to be your customer ID. Here we have the customer ID, and I'm not talking about the customer name. Anyways, for update, we are not going to use the customer data. Okay, we can use customer data, or we can just have some primitive values as a parameter, a couple of parameters. It's up to us. So right now, let's make use of this customer, or to be more precise, we can even change this to a couple of parameters called the customer ID and the customer address. So let's remove these 3 parameters right now. So have a closer attention. Right now, this parameters are empty. Okay, new object array. I don't have any array of values into it. It's completely empty. Now I'm going to change this to the first one as int uh, customer ID, comma, string customer address, right? So this we need to feed in here. So the first argument is going to be for the first parameter is for the first placeholder, which is nothing but customer address. So you can directly place in the customer address, comma, then you can provide the customer ID. So by this way, we are again forwarding the two dynamic parameters to the respective placeholders, the question marks, right? Now, the thing is, if you go back to the service class, there's a change occurs. So we need to follow the same principle of what we followed here as a parameter of int and string. Yesterday, I guess we gave this customer as a parameter, right? So this time it's slightly different. Customer ID, comma, customer address. Hope the syntax is visible. Update customer, customer ID, and customer address. Now, from where we are going to start from? From the app, the app class. Yesterday we had some input, so we followed certain inputs. This time I'm not going to use any of these. Okay, I'm going to do a manual insert. So let's go for a block comment. So no need of the scanner, or at least you can just have the scanner for getting an input for the updation ID and the address, asking for the address. So that we can do. Sysout, enter the change of address, string cust address equals scanner dot next, right? Then again enter the customer ID, or else we can prompt this first. That seems to be more meaningful. Let's put it in the top and capture the int customer ID equals scanner dot next int. This will help us to prompt the input from the user to enter the customer ID and the customer address to which the updation should happen. Now, whom should I look out for? The customer service, correct? We already have the customer service instance looked up from the IOC container and use the object and call the service method, which is update customer, and forward the respective values of customer ID and customer address out there. And this will in turn reach out your customer service, and the customer service is going to forward that couple of parameters to the customer DAO method. And coming to the DAO method, similar approach of the update, instead of insert query, I've just modified to an update query. Rest is all the same. There's no much of a difference. So I'm just returning true. Okay. I'm not doing any more of complex validations here. Let's just take it up to true as a return. Coming back to the app, let's get the return as a Boolean result, and you can say the result, right? I guess everything seems to be fine. So now let's go ahead and run this query. I'm sorry, run this application to execute the query, but this time it's update and it's not insert. So for whom I want to update is for 1001, which is Sabari, and he is changing his address to Delhi. Okay, twice I've printed here. Anyways, the output is there, which is true, right? So to reconfirm, just go to the backend. It's Chennai. Let's refresh. I got updated to Delhi, right? So updation works intact according to the code that we have defined in the DAO, and this code is executed successfully. Is that clear? So this is for update statement, and the same approach that we need to follow for delete customer. And delete customer is also going to be the same, but this time you're going to prompt only for the customer ID for whom you want to delete the record. So instead of update statement, just have delete customer, right? Where delete from customer, where customer ID is this, and you are supposed to forward only the customer ID. That's the only parameter that we have as per the where condition. Delete a particular row based on the customer ID. So the column that we have here is a customer ID column, right? So customer ID, choose any one of the ID to delete it. So let's say I want to delete 1004, and this time the call from the app is going to be to the delete customer, and carry only the customer ID and prompt only for the customer ID. Okay. So let's see if things goes well. Run the application and provide the customer ID as 1004, and the return is true, meaning is one record got deleted. Let's refresh. 1004 is currently there, and now it got deleted. So this is how you perform the operations of DML, data manipulation language, which is none other than your insert, update, and delete. Hope this makes clear for performing the DML. Follow the same logic of the update operations. Okay. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Any questions? So you can see slowly we are upgrading the code. Your DAO got dumped with too much of logic, but that's how it is. The customer DAO. If it's a product, you have a product DAO. If it's an employee, you have a separate employee DAO. So the flow will be separate. Employee service, employee DAO. Product service, product DAO. Product customer service, customer DAO. Account service, account DAO. So you keep having this chain properly aligned, and that's representing a specific entity. The customer is a table, right? We have customer as a table, but when you have customer as a table, here we are representing them as what? Customer as an entity. I technically call them as an entity, but here it's a table. So from the application, we talk in terms of entity. It is considered to be an entity class. Yesterday we created the entity class, which is model, but I'm not technically calling it as entity because we are not following that technical terms here straight away, because that will be used only in the ORM, object relational mapping uh, uh, concept. Okay, so here you'll be using JPA, Java Persistence API, and for example, uh, the the framework like Hibernate. Hibernate is one of the well-known framework for JPA implementations, which supports the features of ORM, and there you'll be creating entities, right? So one entity is mapped to one table. Probably would have worked if not just an understanding. One table, one entity. The same way here. The model is represented like an entity currently for us. So customer is an entity, and for that entity, we need to perform the CRUD operation. And that CRUD operation is all enforced inside this customer DAO. So the same way you have another entity called product. When you have a product as an entity, then you have to have the separate flow for product. What is that product? You have a product class, which is an entity class, product service, product DAO. The same way if you have account, as I said, you should have the flow as account, the model class, right? Account, account service, and account DAO, right? So everything is independent flows. People who are new, please make a note of it. This is how it works. Okay. So any questions?
Uh, Excuse me, sir.
Yes, please.
Uh, is there any specific reason for taking the model class as Java Bean instead of Spring Bean?
Of course, you can't consider that as a Spring Bean because it cannot be managed by the Spring Bean, right? So let's say, for example,
Mm,
if you look at yesterday's demo, I was manipulating the value of the object, how I manually created the object, correct?
mm,
So the creation of object goes like this. Where is that? Here, correct?
yeah.
So this is not the value which is injected by IOC, correct? So
Mm,
these are customized versions of creation work. So this cannot be handed over to the IOC container because I don't know how many number of object is required. Now, how many number of object yesterday we created? 3 objects, correct? Or 4 objects? 4 customer object. These customer objects, the 4 customer object, as per my requirement, I am managing and I am creating it. So handing it over to the IOC doesn't make any. I mean, it doesn't make any sense because IOC's work is not to manage the Java beans. IOC's work is to only manage the Spring beans, right? So if I wanted to create 25 objects, handing it over to the IOC of the model is a little cumbersome. Okay, and that's not the design that we have. Models are not managed by IOCs. Model classes are plain old Java object, Java beans, which should not be managed by IOCs. And there are different other classes. You might create your own custom factory class. I don't want the factory class to be managed by IOC. Well and good. You don't mark them as a Spring Bean. You still carry them as a Java bean. The same way, whenever you create a model classes can't be handled by IOC. You're getting it?
Okay. Okay, sir.
Why? Technically saying why it can't be managed, because if you
Because
see here, yeah, the
the
parameters
values.
have to be injected, right? This can
Mm,
be
okay.
wavering, it can be
Mm,
dynamic, right? Sometimes it's
yeah.
Sabari, sometimes it's Balaji, sometimes it's Sundar Pichai, we don't know. So it's going to be completely customized version, so don't hand it over to the IOC. That's what it means.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
sir.
Any other question?
And one more, sir.
Yes,
Um,
please.
we are using JDBC template in DO class, right, sir? Shall we use the old way of JDBC? Here we are using because of the reduced line of code, the connection statement. Because of
Yeah.
that, we are using JDBC template, or is there any specific reason for that other than reduced line of code?
No, it's not just about reducing the line of code alone. Okay, reducing
Mm,
the line of code specifically in terms of traditional JDBC. Okay,
oh,
but
mm,
apart from that, it has many features. Okay, JDBC template has many features internally to it. So, which is like taking care of closing the connection. Let's say, for example,
okay. Mm,
okay, it handles the connection management, right? I'm not opening
oh,
the connection, I'm not closing the connection,
yeah,
nowhere I close the connection, right? So
yeah.
like which there are many features, there are many features which are introduced in the JDBC template, which is acting as a powerful feature in Spring JDBC. Since we are sitting on top of the Spring framework, okay, it's well and
Mm,
good to follow the Spring JDBC rather than going for a traditional JDBC. But still, yes, of course, you can avoid all these and you can
mm,
write your own JDBC code and you can
mm,
manage connection, you can manage statements, you can manage the driver managers, everything you can
yeah.
manually do it, and you can have that
Okay.
code. Still, it will be acted as a customer DAO repository. Only the thing is
Oh,
the code will change. Here I'm using JDBC template. There you will be
mm,
using the driver manager dot get
driver.
connection.
Mm,
That's the only
yeah.
difference. But
Okay.
JDBC template is more handy for the developer. That's all.
Oh,
It's
okay.
don't think only from the reduction of the line of code. Yes, of course, from the traditional JDBC way of writing the code, it is
Mm,
slightly different. It just looks
okay.
like a one-liner of code. These are something logic bounded. They are even
Mm,
not forcing you to use a try and catch, as I said yesterday. You don't
yeah.
need to even use a try and catch because Spring never forces you to apply try and catch. But if you go for JDBC, it is mandate to apply
Mm,
try catch because you will be having a
yeah.
SQL exception. You have to
Mm,
handle the SQL exception, and for that it is mandate to have a try and catch, or you need to use the clause called
throws.
throws SQL exception, right? But here such intriguing code is not required unless and until if there is any standard way of coding is required. Otherwise, Spring is not forcing you to do so, and they are handling it with a single type of exception, not of multiple variants of exception. It's all builded into the single exception handling mechanisms called data access exception. Any logic of operation you go for, it will, even
Mm,
if you go for batch update, even in the batch update, the type of exception that you can handle is data access exception, and you can intervene and see what's going wrong.
okay.
So, like which there are multiple. It's not just about JDBC template. There are multiple other classes are also there. Okay,
Okay.
so we do
Okay.
have a simple JDBC insert class, simple JDBC insert class. That is something which is pretty easier for us to work around rather than working with this insert statement that we have used. So if you look
Oh,
at here, we are using insert with the parameter arguments, right? So if you go
yeah.
for that simple JDBC insert statement, it will be slightly different. You can directly pass the parameters without even writing the SQL query. You
Okay,
don't
sir.
need to write the SQL query itself. Okay. Without that,
Oh,
you can just work around by using it. So that is also part of the Spring JDBC. So like which there
mm,
are multiple other classes are also there. Okay. For batch updates you have, for procedural calls you have, Even in JDBC we have, but there it's going to be again more involvement of management of code is required, but here the management of code is not required. There is the actual
Okay.
difference. Of course, yes, you should know the difference. Otherwise, it'll be slightly different if you are unable to differentiate the difference between a Spring JDBC. So because they might ask some generic question, why should I go for Spring JDBC when I already have a better JDBC traditional way? These are the differences that you have to throw. Okay,
Okay.
why not? The next bigger concept that we are going to discuss is on transaction management. Okay, so there you will
Okay.
understand the power of Spring JDBC and combined with transaction management, which is in JDBC, it's slightly cumbersome.
Okay.
Sir, is JDBC template object is synchronized? Is thread safe?
Of course, it is thread safe, but it is not thread safe in all manners. Okay. So why I'm saying is it depends on the application logic that you're going to use, because right now it is considered to be a standalone application, correct? But the same thing that we will be taking up to the web application. So when we are taking up to the web application, the number of requests that comes to the same code is going to be different. It's not single request, but here it's going to be a single request, so there is going to be not much of a difference. But when it comes to the web application scenario, the same JDBC template have to be further intervened in terms of handling with the thread structures, because their default JDBC template synchronizations won't work. Okay, so it has a different meaning of synchronizations here. It depends on how this application is going to be built up. So based on that only, you'll be having the option to declare them synchronized or unsynchronized class. And also you have to notice that this JDBC template, okay, if you look at it, this is not something pretty new. Okay, you can see it is available from 2001. Okay, so this 2001 meaning is it's from the earlier stage when Rod Johnson brought out this Spring implementations. Nearing to that time itself, they brought this JDBC template. So it's pretty old. Okay. Okay, here also they have given some statement, and an instance of this class is thread safe once configured. That's what I was saying. Okay, it is thread safe once configured. By default in standalone, there is no need of a configuration. But when it comes to the web, yes, of course, we need to do a configuration. But we can convert them to a thread safe. That's what they are saying. So that's why I said it depends on the environment. Okay, any other question? So moving on, we have find all customers. So I want to find all customers data. So this time it's not going to be Boolean. Actually, it should return a list of customers, right? So let's say list of customer, and here it's just going to return customer. Now coming to the customer service, again, list of customer and customer. Okay. So why I'm saying list of customer? Because find all customer means find all customers. So how many rows we have right now in the backend?
3.
3. So one row represents one object, customer object. So totally how many objects to be created here? 3 objects. So it's going to be pushed into the list, and then we are going to return. But how the query would look like? So what is that kind of a query that we have to use here? The JDBC template dot, you have a method called query. There are again parameterized methods are there, multiple parameterized methods are there, overloaded methods are there. So right now I'm going to choose this one, okay, a query with string and row mapper. Please make a note of it. A query with string and row mapper. So what is this row mapper? I will brief you shortly, but right now select star from customer. Okay. If I have this approach, now what it means, what do we mean by this query statement?
It's selecting all the customers.
Yeah, selecting all the customers. That's fine. Selecting all the customer, and it should return the 3 rows, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
1,
Result set.
2, 3. Yeah. So all the rows have to be finally produced into a one single object called result set. Now you will be storing them in the RS, and in the traditional JDBC I'm talking about result set collection, right? Collection of results. That's what it means. Result set mean collection of results that's returned after executing this query. Now, if I have the similar approach, now what's the problem is I might be using the select statement in multiple places of my application. So my application is going to have 3 lakh code base, let's say, or let's say I have 2 lakh code base. So when I have 2 lakh code base, okay, when I have 2 lakh code base, it means that in let's say, for example, 75 classes, I might be using the select statement. In 75 classes, for this customer manipulation, select star from customer is what we are going to do. Okay, because I might be having multiple drop downs in my web application. Okay, so I'll be going pages and pages. In many places there is a need to display the customer details. So here again it's a select statement of customer, here again select statement of customer. So in multiple frames, and you will have independent classes for that, you'll be having the option to make use of the I mean, you need to have this result set to be placed in every action that you do. So redundancy of result set operation occurs. That can be reduced. You don't need to do this result set operation multiple times. Instead, you can just have it as a single location of iterating the result set for either way. It could be a select star from customer, or it could be a select star from customer where the customer address equals something, or it can be select star from customer where customer ID equals something, anything. Either way, the row mapper can help us to reduce your redundant code. So when I have this result set in place, then you'll be having a rs dot has next, right? So just to check if the uh, result set is having any records, and then you will be using rs dot next, and then you will be pointing the specific cursor location in order to fetch the value. So while you're operating on this, it is result set means I'm talking in terms of an iterator. We'll be using an iterator here, right? RS representation is an iterator. So you'll be using the specific iterator to iterate them, and that is also an additional code that we do, which can be reduced when it comes to your row mapper. As the name suggests, row mapper. For every row, okay, we are going to quickly map that row to the object. Which object am I going to map it?
Customer object.
To the customer object. What is the table that we have? It is a customer table. One row talks about one customer object. So like which I have how many rows? 3. So I need to equivalently create 3 customer objects. Now you answer, I'm dynamically suddenly coming and creating 3 customer object based on the number of rows available. Can I leave this customer object creation to the IOC now? At this point of time, hey IOC, suddenly go and create one object and have a dynamic value which is pulled from the database. Can you do that? No, that's why the customer is not managed by IOC. Customer class is kept as a model, which is just called as Java beans, and it is not a Spring Bean. Is that clear? One more way in which you can understand that why I'm not marking the customer as a Spring managed class. Instead, I'm calling it as a Java Bean class. Correct? So, okay. Now, so 3 objects are created and all the 3 objects have to be added into where? Into the list. Even that I don't need to do it. Okay, at present. Okay, I don't need to create the list. Just you're thinking about creating 3 objects dynamically. What happens if it is a 4 object? Suppose 4 rows are there. I need to go to the row mapper and then I need to create one more object? No. As per the row mapper, you will only create only one object. Code wise, you will create only one object. But depend on the number of rows that is returned, iteration will happen internally to create as many number of objects required automatically, and they will collect them all and return it in the type of list. That's going to be automated. So that's what your row mapper is going to do. Row mapper. Internally, anyways, it's going to use the same result set. The logic what they are going to use is the same result set only. No difference at all. Okay, but few lines of codes are completely abstracted. Okay, it's
Sir,
not known to
suppose
us.
without list we are using means it will return the first object.
Yeah, without list, if you are that is why I have one more method also, which I will be showing you the demo. I'm not returning a list, only single record comes back. Of course, you can use the same row mapper, but at that time it will return only one object, because the result set that captures the total value is how many row? Only one row, right? At that time, how many object is this row mapper class should create? Only one object, and it won't return it. I mean, it is typically not in the form of an list. That you will understand once I explain this part of code. Okay, so right now, if I hover the cursor on top of this, you have to notice, okay, let's say comma null temporarily. You have the cursor here. Okay, it's ambiguous. Jdbc template dot query
Query for object will use, sir?
no, here we don't need query for object. That's going to be used in the second method. What I wanted to what I wanted to show you is this. So look at this query. This is what we are using right now, right? Can you see the return type?
Yes.
List of generics. T
Yes, sir.
represents any type. Okay, it automatically returns that list. That's why I've given list of customer anyways. Query for object is what we are going to use it in this method. That I'll come back shortly.
Okay.
Okay, now the thing is I need to create the row mapper. There are many ways to create a row mapper. One, you can create a separate class. In the DAO itself, I'm going to create a class called customer row mapper. For product, you can have product row mapper. It depends on. Okay, so this is one way, or you can create it like an anonymous class in the argument itself. In the argument itself, you can just create the row mapper, new row mapper. You know what I mean by anonymous class, right? So row mapper of, you can just say customer, and then you can think of having the logic to be written like this. And here you need to override the map row method. Map row method is the method that's coming from the row mapper. So row mapper, if you see, it carries a map row method which returns customer based on the generic type that I've used. What is this called as? This is your anonymous class, correct? This is how we create an anonymous class. but this cannot be reused, right? So that's the reason I'm making it to be a common by creating a class called customer row mapper. Either way, or else you can also use lambda expression. Why I can use lambda expression is because the here we need to say implements. Why it is eligible for lambda row mapper. If I go to the row mapper, you should notice the row mapper is already demarcated as what?
Functional interface.
Functional interface. So what does that functional interface means? It's
Only
enabling, enabling this interface to be a part of lambda syntax. But as per the rule, functional interface says SAM. So what is it? SAM is single abstract method. And the only single abstract method that we have is what here? Map row method. Map row method is a SAM method, single abstract method. That's the rule for functional interface. And this functional interface comes from Java 8. So this interface is eligible for lambda. So instead of anonymous class, you can also replace that anonymous class code syntax to what syntax? Lambda syntax. It will shorten your code. Lambda will help you to shorten the anonymous class code. That's the main advantage. Anonymous class code can be shortened very well with the help of lambda syntaxes. So this is the method that we need to override inside this class. I'm not going for lambda because people might be not aware of it. So I don't want to complex things. But I just wanted to give you a clue that yes, it is eligible for lambda since it is a functional interface. So customer generics type. And why there's an error? Because you need to override that single abstract method, correct? So what is a abstract method? Map row. Control space IDE will pull out the template for the map row. Automatically it returns the customer. It seems to be it's returning customer here, right? Single object it's returning, but actually at the end your query method will internally collect all the customer and put it in a list and return it. That's what is going to happen. Okay. Even though here it doesn't seem to be a list of customer, but finally the query method is going to do that. Okay, let me give you a small understanding of what this is going to do. So you have a class that implements row mapper interface of type customer as a generic, and you're overriding the method map row which returns customer. What is the two argument that it takes? One is the same old result set, and row num. To be more precise, you can have a look at here. You have what? Result set coming from java.sql, right? So they are internally using only the result set as a parameter, and there is a row number. Okay, it is returning the row number as well, right? To row number means the number pointed to that specific row, the cursor pointing. The cursor will denote the row number, whether it's 1, 2, or 3. Okay, so you have the row number there as well. Now you can just replace this code. So how to replace? Customer equals new customer of. Okay, so I've just created a new customer object. Now before that, you can just use the int cust id equals rs dot. You need to use this mechanism. Okay, get int. So you can either use column number or you can use the index. So I'm going for index row number 1. or you can just point the row number here. Okay, next time when it's going to iterate, it's going to make the row number as what? 2. Right? So that's what technically that's happening. So it's better not to use that specific flow of result set. Instead, we are going to make use of the existing result set. So this is a row number anyways, but I'm dealing with get int of the column index. So column index is going to be 1. Then we have string, which is customer name, right? rs dot get string of column index 2 and string cust address equals rs dot get string of get string of column number 3. So we have all these values which you can punch it inside this customer. So let's say customer underscore ID, comma, customer underscore name, comma, customer underscore address. Now, if in case you want to make a note of it that which row number it is working on, you can just print that row number to just denote that this is row number 1 or 2 or 3. Okay, this is column indexing, right? Then finally, you got to return customer. That's all.
This row number will be automatically incremented, sir.
Based on the, yes, of course, based on the number of rows that's coming from the backend. That's what which you're going to notice here. Okay, when I print it. So what is that? You have, if you are fetching only 2 rows, right? So the row number will be 1 and 2. If it's 3 rows, it's 3. You're getting it. So they are going to pass the result set object and they are going to pass the row number, respective row numbers. There is a meaning. So any questions on this? So we are still using that RS, a readily cooked result set, and creating a customer object and returning the customer. But it seems to be there's only one customer object, but there are 3 rows, correct? There are 3 rows. Where are the other 3 objects? This will be iterated internally. So we need not worry upon that. As per the number of rows, the map row method will be invoked, and each time the method will point out to the respective row number movement. The cursor will be pushed, the result set cursor will be internally pushed, and then it will fetch the data, and the data will be populated in terms of a customer. And these customers will be in turn returned by this method, and all the customers will be collectively collected in a list. Is that clear? So if you have any questions, please let me know. A simplified version of row mapper. The same row mapper you can use for any number of custom queries of customer table. Select star from customer, select star from customer, where customer ID equals something or name equals something. Any select query for the customer, still this row mapper would be suffice, because this is a single representation of the class that we have created for the customer, the same way you created for product, a separate class, product row mapper. So this class can be reused whenever required. That is how it means. So customer row mapper is a type of row mapper. So going back to your customer DAO, what do you have to punch in here? New customer row mapper. You're getting it? So this in turn returns. Now if I hover the cursor here, okay, automatically it says what is the return? List of customer, because what I have forwarded here, customer row mapper. The compiler is clever enough to understand that it's going to return list of customer. So you can create a list of customer, right? And finally, you can return customer. Is it clear? So it's a one-time attempt that we have to create. If you still want to avoid all these things, I don't want to hard code all these things, can that be made a little bit easier? That's when we need to go for JPA. ORM, object relational mapping, that would make your life much more simplified than we are working on top of the JDBC, Spring JDBC. Spring JDBC itself seems to be a little bit of code. Then you can still reduce that lines of code to be more object-oriented fashion of communication with the database through object relational mapping feature through a framework called Hibernate. Hibernate is another big ocean of framework, so that helps you to reduce all these work. Direct mapping, entity, table, object, row, a direct mapping. So you have native SQL, you have Hibernate JPA query language, HQL, Hibernate query language, native query language you can write. Without queries also you can pull the data. A lot of operations which you can perform through JPA mechanisms. But this is one shot where we can try to create a mapper type and then customize the code and then return whatever you want. Okay, let's see what's going to happen with this row number. Now what we have to do is we need to invoke this method out here. So let me comment out this code. Just go straight. I'm just commenting here. You can just uncomment and then read through these codes later. Okay. Once I share the code on the GitHub. Okay, this time it's customer service dot find all customers dot for each system dot out method referencing operator println. Just for a time being, I'm just using the Lambda expressions here to shorten the code. So this returns what? It returns a list of customer. So list of customer is eligible for each, and for each is eligible for Lambda expression with the method referencing operator. And this is going to return that return of 3 objects. Pretty cool. We got all the records. So you can see the row numbers. That's why I printed there to make a understanding that what the row mapper is doing. So we had how many rows there in the table? 3 rows are there. The cursor, result set is having a cursor in it, right? Result set is having a cursor, and the cursor will keep pointing to row number 0. Actually, it's 0. It starts from 0, 1, and 2. And you have 3 columns there, 1, 2, and 3. The 3 columns is represented as a column number using the column index. You have seen that, right? So this shows that that particular map row method is called how many times? Map row method is called how many times? 3 times. And each time the method returns what? Customer object. All the customer objects are collectively stored in where? In the list. And finally, the query method returns that list of customers, and that's what we are seeing here. So all these data are coming from where? From the backend, right? So technically speaking, since we have the Lambda and the line of code that we are using, it's just one line of code. If you see a traditional for each loop that we have to use, at least minimum 3 to 4 lines that we have to invest. But it's just one liner of code. So that's the power of Lambda. So please, if you people are, going to work on application development, or you're going to take up some interview in the near future, then you have to upgrade yourself on Java 8. That's very much essential. So please do spend some time in learning the lambdas. Lambdas and streams are going to be the unique, and it's going to be the most wanted features in Java. and in any interview you go for, you'll be asked for that. Okay. So if you have any questions or you have somewhere a clarity, I'm ready to do it. If you want to dig more into it, you can go back to the customer DAO and look out for this query method. Here is the source code of the query method, okay, which is in turn having a call to the result. Okay, so result is in turn having this query SQL row mapper results at extractor, which is internally used, and forwarding the row mapper that we are setting it. Okay, so it does much more intrinsic job, so you can go more in detail to it and see what's those methods are meant for. It depends on how further you dig into and see how the source code is written to handle this query. Okay, so the next thing is more similar to this. Let's catch up with the same set of codes, but this time it's query for object, query for object, select star from customer, where customer ID equals question mark. This time is with the constraint, right? I'm going to give it with a constraint. So we are using select star from customer where customer ID equals question mark. In that case, then we need 3 parameters. You recall the one which we used here, new object of customer ID. This we can feed in as a second parameter so that customer ID, okay, it's based on customer name. Okay, not a problem. Let's search based on customer name. That's not an issue. So now what we are trying to do is we are trying to create an object array to forward this parameter, right? We are trying to forward this customer name into this specific placeholder. Okay, so that's what it means. I guess that is an obsolete references there. Okay. It says they have deprecated it. Not sure from which version they have done it. Okay, I guess they have made it deprecated. I have to check that, but that's not an issue. We'll still work with it. The newer version or the acceptable versions that they've made is with the arg types, the SQL types of the argument constants from java.sql.types. So we have to see if that works. So it's an object type, right? Java.sql. It's an enumeration. Not an issue. Let's check. SQL.types. Sorry. Types. Okay. Just give me a second. I'll just give you a complete explanation of what's happening here. You can see there's a striked out line is there on top of this method. That seems to be that this method is deprecated. Okay, obsolete. In Microsoft technologies, they use a term called obsolete, but in Java terminology, it's deprecated. Both means the same. So those methods are not in use anymore. But still, I'm trying to use this method. Let's see what's going to happen. So the three parameters that I'm passing here is the row mapper, the customer name, which need to be binded to this parameter, are the only three parameters that I have. And going back to the app, this time, let's call for customer service dot find customer by name, and the name that I'm going to give is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs. And let's see if that's going to return the Steve Jobs data. Customer. Let's not call the find all customers for a while. Let's run this again. Pretty good. So total number of rows that's returning to the row mapper is only single row. That single row cursor pointer index will be 0 only. It doesn't mean 0 rows are returned. Okay, it's pointing to the 0th row. Actually, there's only one row because we have given a condition, find by Steve Jobs, right? So it's pulling up the Steve Jobs. If I say Sundar Pichai, then this time it should bring up the Sundar Pichai data. Okay, so you got this Sundar Pichai information, but if we go back to the customer service and if you see the line of code that we have written, sorry, customer DAO, a query for object always returns a single object. That's why it is called as query for object. Okay, single object it's returning. It's not returning collection. Query will return list of object. Query for object, query for a specific object is what we are asking for, right? So that's the reason that we have this uh, query for object method of the JDBC template. There is another version which I'm using right now, JDBC template.query for object. Let me see if this works as expected or else it's throwing any exception. Perfect. It's still showing the same thing. No problem in it. So what is actually happening is why they have deprecated is they have made it a mandate flow that the argument what you're forwarding should be mapped to the SQL type. So what is the customer name is? Customer name in the database data type is varchar. So they are asking us to refer that. Okay, it's a enumeration. It's like, I mean, it's a constant, not an enumeration. It's a constant value. Okay, it's a constant final value varchar, and that value is stored in this new int. If I have two parameters here, then you need to give comma, and the second parameter database data type have to be mentioned. This is in Java, this customer name to be treated as a string. So they would have made this mandate because of certain drawbacks that they would have faced without mentioning the data type in terms of searching for a single object. So that could be the reason, I guess, but I'm not having any constant reason that why they have made this first version to be deprecated and they have enabled the second version by carrying the data type. So what we are doing here is integer array, like how we have given an object array for the parameter. So this question mark will be replaced with the value of customer name, instructing the DB interaction saying that that particular parameter is of type varchar in the DB. If I'm going to search with customer ID, customer ID is what? Is an int. So I need to change this to an int or number type as per the database data type that you are using. So java.sql.types is actually using the data type of the DB and pointing to the query that this particular parameter is of this type. Okay, and why it is an integer array? Because you might have multiple, so you have to search by customer name and customer address. Okay, so in that case, then what you will do? Customer name and customer address. Then you have two question marks. So two parameters will be given. For two parameters, what are their respective data types in the DB? That we need to point out. So, but still the deprecated works. Okay, even though they have made it as a deprecated, still it works. But the better version of this method is this one. Okay, is that clear? But still I'm using the row mapper. But this time the row map method will be map row will be executed only once. It will be called only once because it's returning only single record. You're getting it? So just have a look onto this. If I go to the types, you will see all the public final static int. Okay, constant variables. Final is constant, static variable. Okay, final marks it as constant, right? You cannot change the value. So you have different numbers for that. So integer as 4. We have varchar here, right? Varchar is 12. See. So based on that data type definitions, we are mapping it. So what it means, as they are giving the definition here, the constant in the Java programming language, sometimes referred to as a type code that identifies the generic SQL data type. So this will be helpful for identifying the generic SQL data type when they are communicating with the respective backend. Because we have different backends today, right? We have Oracle, we have MySQL, we have DB2. So there are different versions of database that we have. So in order to not have a conflict, I guess they have enabled this because few SQL vendors might use a different data type for int. We have int, we have number in Oracle. Okay, we do have integer here. Okay, so it varies from database to database. So it's better to point out which type of database that you are interacting and what is the data type of that particular column is pointed to. Okay. You can ask a question, why this kind of a flow is not used here? Why it is not deprecated here? Query why it is not. It is not required. Do you have any specific constraint here to be more precise with the database asking for looking out to this particular column of this value? No, no condition. Just throw the query, get all the data back from the backend. That's all. So that's how it works. Anyways, I'm recently seeing this change since I worked on Spring JDBC a little back, sometime long back. So I guess they have made this change recently. Okay. Any other question? Hope this is clear. Do you have any question on this? Let me know so that I can still help you out. Any question?
Sir, in database, can we have another duplicate row for the same user and check what's returning? Can we check for this?
Come again. What is that?
No, input user you have given like a Sundar Pichai, right? Username.
Correct.
In the database, can we have another row with the same name?
Yeah,
Another
of
row.
course you can.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. It returns 2 records there. It will return a 2 record here. So while this is a specific constraint, a single record operation. So if you
So
hover
from
the cursor here, you can see the return is just a customer. Okay.
getters. Okay.
Yeah. So now if you are looking out for the exception to be seen, so let's go manually insert into customer values. 1004 Sundar Pichai, and let's say okay. So let's execute this. Let's correct, right? Sundar Pichai. So right now we have two Sundar Pichai here, and if I execute this query, so you can see
Sir,
still the value
spelling
is
is
picked up
wrong
as
actually.
1002. Yeah. So 1002 is the first record. Okay. So technically speaking, it is not ending up with any specific exceptions as in this case, but it's pulling the first given value. The result set is capturing two things, but you're trying to query only for one object. So which is the better approach here for this kind of an operation? Instead of returning a single object, you want to return multiple objects, then it should be a collection. And in the query, so you can see again, you have yeah, this one. If you look at this one, it seems to be pretty reasonable. String SQL, row mapper, and object arguments. There's object arguments to bind the query, which is of a prepared statement with a specific condition. Okay, so you can give a condition here, and you can pull the list of customers out here. The same query can be reused for even pulling more than one record. But this one is exactly to pull a single object, fetching the first record. But here, if you apply the same condition, then what is required is the args are required, and at that time you will get both the records, which is going to be pulled out. So where customer name, New object of Sundar Pichai, and we have to go back to app, enable this one. I saved it. Find all customers, right? It's not
Sir,
returning.
spelling is different actually in
Okay,
SQL.
okay, that is a reason. Let me check. Sundar Pichai. Okay, yeah. Yes, is that the reason? Okay. So for this query, let's see what's going to happen. Okay, that seems to be good. It's pulling both the records, but in this case, I've seen like an exception, but I'm not sure. Let's recall this. I guess this is clear, right? What we have done here is we have enabled the condition and we are passing, sorry, we are passing the constraint to this. Okay, now it is pulling more than one record. So this will handle, but this is what is a question again. So let's enable this. As far as I could recall, it was ending up with an exception, but let's see. Correct. Yes, that's what it is. This is what I was actually expecting. So it says there are two rows, two times the looping happens. Finally, the query is working only on single object. So it says incorrect result size data access exception, incorrect result size expected 1 but actual 2. So while you have more than one output for this particular custom query, better don't use query for object. Simple. Clear? So query for object operates on top of a single record. So that's why always you should ensure that it should be pointed out to a column which is unique, column which is marked as unique, or column which is marked as primary key in order to avoid this challenge of multiple row return. So this is also a type of exception, but that is again falling under to the category called data access exception. Incorrect result size data access exception. So same query which we can manipulate with the query method, but here it's slightly different. The condition along with the parameter value also, and they are not all prompting for this. Okay, where this is not obsolete or deprecated, so you can use without referring the type, directly with the parameter type and the row mapper class instance followed with the query. Okay, any other question? There might be multiple other types of query is there. Okay, you can just go through whenever you find time. Even for query for object, you have different variants of overloaded methods are there. So just have a look onto it. I guess almost two variants we have already seen in each query methods. We have seen two variants. Few other variants you can just have a closer look onto it and do a small research. You will get the knowledge. Any other question? Do anyone have any
Sir,
challenge?
two way we can implement the row mapper implementation, right? One is we can write a specific class and that will be reusable for all the customer related queries, select queries. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
if we implement that row mapper in the anonymous function within the function, that row mapper functionality will be specific for only that function alone.
Correct. That anonymous, you can also see anonymous classes are written in this way. It depends on where you create that reusability of logic. So you can create anonymous class in multiple variants. So let's say, for example, so it's a customer row mapper, right? So we have to, let's say, customer row mapper CRM equals, I'm sorry, not the customer row mapper. Okay, so by this way, what will happen is you can still reuse it within the specific method. What is the name that you have to drop in here? Just RM. You write all the logic out here. You're getting it?
That RM will be specific for find all customer only. I can't use it in
Exactly.
find customer by name, correct?
Of course, you can't use it because it's a local variable, right? You can't enforce them here. You can't enforce them here in this find customer by name.
Okay.
You're getting it? So this is very local to this particular functionality alone. If I take them up, okay, this is on the class level denotions. But if it's a class in the class level denotion, then probably we can refer that RM anywhere you want. But this can be used only within this class. You're getting it?
Yeah.
So this is not an advisable. You can't throw the anonymous class just like that inside the class, because anyone can access if by mistake you make it public. A lot of complications you will have. So this is not the right design pattern. I'm sorry, coding pattern. So you can have it anonymous class implementation within the method, so it's more protected, right? Only within the method. Anywhere, any number of time you want the select statement or query, you can punch in that RM. Or else, to further reduce these lines of code, you can just like that copy this lines of code and drop it inside the parameter of this method itself. One way. You can even further reduce this to a lambda expressions by using the same approach. Okay, so you're just talking about the map-row method, okay, which carries a couple of argument. Let's say result set and fronum. Okay, then you have your lambda operators, and you can define whatever you wanted inside this. So what happens here? The lines of code seems to be simplified, right? Okay, it should return anyways, return null temporarily. Okay, so this is how a lambda would look like. So you can write the same lambda syntax directly inside this method parameter. It's a anonymous method, like it looks like an anonymous method, or you can use your anonymous class, or you can better have a separate class. This is the best approach always when there is a reusability required. If it's only one time in the overall application, you're going to use only one time, not more than that, you're very sure about it, then better don't go for a separate class like this. You better inject it within your class itself. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is lambda style. This is anonymous class style. Any other question? So inside this, what you will do is you will write the logic, whatever logic that we wrote here in this custom, you just copy this and then drop in there. That's how lambda or anonymous class would look like. But the closely that you have to watch, the only difference is seems to be the style of this code is slightly different from anonymous class. Yeah, any question? So I've given all the template for your references. You can use accordingly. So I guess we are done with this different approach. The next thing that we have to see is on the transaction management. That's a little complex. So I need a little bit of time to give you more clarity on that. So we'll take the remaining time for the transactions. But before I go to the transactions, we'll take a short break. But before I go to the break, we go for the break. If you have any questions, please let me know. Let's look at the question and I'll try to make things clear. So always hold that query is for querying all rows from the table. Query for object is to query only a single object from the table. If it's returning more than one, as we try to work around, it ended up with an exception, incorrect results size data exception. Okay. So, and these are the different ways in which you can feed in your row mapper, either an anonymous style or lambda style, or even you can go with the traditional way of creating a separate class and make it more reusable. No questions? Okay. So we'll take a 10 minutes of break and then we'll come back. Hello. Am I audible? Please confirm.
Yeah, audible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So any questions you have, please let me know before we go to the next topic called transaction management. That's a little complex and complex in sense, not too complex, but getting to the actual understanding of the difference between a programmatic transaction and the declarative transaction will be slightly uh, uneasy to catch up, but I'll try to make it as possible as I can to make you people understand. So before we step into that, any further questions on this? So we have done almost all areas of CRUD operations here. Create, read, update, and delete has been done, and we have fetched different versions of data from the backend. So this is how Jdbc actually implements. So to look at the demo of transaction, I'm going to create a new table. Okay, let me directly create it here. Customer account table, and this customer account table is going to have some customer ID. Let's call it as cust ID, which is an int. You can see that data type that we are using here is int. Then amount. Let's make it a little simple. I don't have much fields here. It's just customer ID and amount. Okay, and the amount is also going to be an int. A customer ID being a primary key, we are going to have it a unique customer and their amount that they have in their account. So that's what this table talks about. Nothing too complex, a pretty simple table which carries a couple of columns in it. Let's go ahead and fetch this. Select star from customer account. So right now both the columns are having empty records. There is no record out there. Customer ID and amount both are empty. Now we can go ahead and see how the transaction handling can be achieved. Okay. Somewhere down the lane, you would have come across a term called asset property, right? This talks about the consistency of the data. Atomicity, consistency, integrity, and durability, correct? Asset property that is applied exclusively for database. So what do we mean by transaction? In general, transaction means a change that happens in your backend. It's going to be called as a transaction. So we did a operation called select right now. Is select a transaction? Can we consider select as one transaction to the database? I guess no, correct? Select is not a transaction, right? It's just hitting the database and getting the data back. Because the select doesn't make any change to the existing database. So select is not a transactional statement. It's a non-transactional statement. But how about a transactional statement like update? Is update a transaction statement? Yes, update is a transactional statement because when you inject an update statement to the database, some change happens to your database, a table, a record, a specific record gets changed, right? You do an insert. Is that a transaction? Yes, a change happens to the database. You do a delete. Is there a change in the database? Yes, of course, one row gets deleted. So it's a transaction. So transaction is something that we make a change in the database is what we denote it as a transaction. Other than that, the select statements are non-transactional statement. While we are performing this transaction, we need to follow this ACID principle. The ACID principle is talking about, you need to talk about the atomicity, consistency, integrity, and durability. I'm not going to give more briefing about these terms, but you can just go and catch it up from Google. But this is something very important. Now, since we are talking about the Spring JDBC, the Spring JDBC should provide us a provision for handling the transaction securely. Meaning is what? Transaction is all happens, okay, all happens or nothing happens, correct? That is what the transaction means. All happens or nothing happens. All happens means what? Whatever change you are trying to do should be applied, but it should not be in a partial state. The change that you make should not be on a partial state. Everything happens 100% successful or 0% failure. But you can't say, hey, 50% successful, your transaction is success. No. If 50% or 70% or 60% will not be counted at all for a transaction. 100% success or 0% failure. Failure is fine. 0% failure, no transaction have happened. 0% means it's completely failure. Or we can say 100% failure. Another way of more understandable, we can say 100% failure. 100% failure or 100% success, right? 100% failure is okay for us. That's absolutely fine. I'm accepting it because nothing happened. But 50% is a problem. So in which scenarios, like for example, account transfer. So you go for HDFC Bank and you have the ICICI and you are doing a amount transfer from one account to another account. Now, account 1 and account 2 is what the general definition that we take for when it comes to the transaction. Here what you do is withdraw and here what you do is deposit, correct? But either way, the account is getting updated. Update is the transaction. Whether you do a withdraw or deposit doesn't matter. So here it is all about a minus and here it is all about a plus transaction. So I already have 1,000 rupees here and here I have a 2,000 rupees. Now this should become 1,000 and this should become 2,000. Is that success? Yes, 100% success. But here it is 1,000 and here also it is still 1,000, means withdrawal had happened, okay, but deposit didn't happen. Meanwhile, there is a network failure or something else. So your transaction failed partially. Can this be acceptable? No. That's why they will provide some 24 hours of window period where your amount will be credited back and ensuring that your transaction is not going wrong. Because the commit happens only when both the end they have a flag saying that success, then only the commit will actually happen. That is how the banking systems have been designed. So, but what I'm saying is I'm just trying to simulate 50% transaction. Will you accept for it? No one will accept. We are not ready to lose our money, right? So I don't want to lose any penny. So the thing is 50% is not acceptable, either 100% success or it should be 100% failure. So 100% failure, what it means is, even though if this transaction is completed, okay, you have done a minus, account is withdrawn, amount is withdrawn, but still deposit didn't happen, then this transaction should be rolled back, right? We need to roll back the transaction. If in case this transaction, this ICICI Bank transaction responds to HDFC saying that, hey, I didn't receive the transaction from my end, the deposit didn't happen due to some technical glitches, the the amount didn't get credited in my end. So immediately the HDFC will do a process called rollback. So until then, they are maintaining that transaction until they get the success response from the ICICI end as well. Right. So that is what we are trying to apply here in terms of a transaction. So in Spring JDBC, we have two approaches of transaction handling. One is you can do it via programmatic, a complete programmatic approach. Another way is via declarative approach. Programmatic approach is one way. Another way is declarative approach. Declarative approach. So declarative approach, technically it means more of annotation based. Okay. But here, line by line, you will programmatically write the code to manage the transaction. Line by line code will be written is what programmatic means. Declarative, you can reduce all those lines of code and make it with a single annotation. The things will work in terms of transaction management. But to perform this transaction management, what the Spring JDBC provides us, two things. One, we need to have transaction template. Transaction template. And second, we need transaction manager. Transaction manager. So what is one? We need transaction template. Another one, transaction manager. These two are important component. These two will be configured in our configuration class. These two need to be configured in our configuration class. How we will configure this? We'll be configuring this with the help of @bean annotation. You're getting it? We're going to use @bean annotation, right? So @bean annotation will be used to configure these beans, transaction template and transaction manager, like how we created a JDBC template, right? The same way now we are going to create transaction template and we are going to create transaction manager. Transaction template depends on transaction manager. Transaction template depends on transaction manager. Transaction manager depends on data source. Transaction manager depends on data source. Okay, please make a note of it. The flow is transaction template will depend on transaction manager. Transaction manager in turn depends on data source. So there is a dependencies that's been hierarchically maintained. After we have done all the configuration settings properly, then we are good to go by using the programmatic approach and as well as the declarative approach. Either way, we need this transaction template and transaction manager in place. Is that clear? So if you have any questions on this, please let me know. This is a theoretical abstract understanding. Let's go into the demo quickly. But prior to that, I want to set up the context. So if we want to achieve the transaction in JDBC template, in the Spring JDBC implementation, the most important thing is the template, transaction template and transaction manager. So any questions, please let me know. No questions? Are we good to go? Okay. So now Going straight into the configuration class. Straight into the configuration class. Here where we need to do a step by step, like how we created the JDBC template bean configuration, bean definition for JDBC template, the same way bean definition for transaction template. Before we go for the transaction template, let's create the transaction manager. That's the source. So public, let's go for add bean. Public data source transaction manager. So data source transaction manager who's managing the transaction, who's going to manage the transaction context. That's why the name is kept as transaction manager, managing the transactional flow. And that comes from where data source transaction manager comes from the JDBC data source of your org Spring framework. Org Spring framework JDBC data source transaction manager, right? So public data source transaction manager, you can call it as data source transaction manager. And internally to it, let's create this once equals new data source transaction manager. Okay. We are creating an object definition. Once the object definition is created, use the data source transaction manager dot set data source. Are we ready with the data source? Yes, we already have that in place. Just inject that. We are injecting setter based injection. This is a setter based injection. Call the bean definition of the data source and finally return the data, so the transaction manager data source object. So this is the very first step. Is that clear? Are you getting this point? So we are creating, first step is to create transaction manager using data source transaction manager.
Exactly what it returns, actually.
It returns, we are returning the transaction manager object.
Okay.
We are returning the transaction manager object. You can see I've created one transaction manager object, right? The transaction manager object, before I return, I'm setting the dependency. What this transaction manager requires, the data source that we have created, because it's going to apply the transaction for this environment, data source environment.
Okay.
We are talking with the MySQL database, right? That's
Yes,
there
sir.
available in the data source. So it needs that information to set the context, transactional context. It will create a transactional environment. Okay. So anything happens, the manager will take care. But to apply that in reality, in code, we need the tool. To enable this manager, we need the tool. The tool is nothing but the template. So the next one is add bean public transaction template. Transaction template comes from where? Again, Spring Framework transaction dot support. Make a note of it. It's not directly coming from jdbc.data source. It's a common pool. It's from a common package. So org.springframework.transaction.support. But if you notice in our pom.xml, the dependency hierarchy, there is a spring-tx. Can you see that? Spring-tx. Okay. So this spring-tx is a separate part binded with JDBC. Okay. Spring JDBC has this separate interdependent library called Spring-TX transaction. So that's how we are interconnected with. So template coming from transactional library or the package. So transaction template, create the transaction template object definition. This is only a definition that we create here, which will be given to the IOC container who will initiate the creation of the object, correct? But when you drop in this, you can notice that it will prompt for the platform transaction manager. Transaction template will depend on the transaction manager, right? So we need to inject the transaction manager instance into the transaction template. So this is a constructor based injection, correct? Injection or wiring. Then finally, what do you have to return? The transaction template object. Return transaction template object. That's all. Same as like how we did for the JDBC template. JDBC template depends on data source. Finally, JDBC template object is returned. The same way data source transaction manager is created and then transaction template is created. Transaction template is injected with transaction manager. Transaction manager is injected with data source. So this is step 2. Step 2. Second step, to create the transaction template. Okay. So template class, you can see the definition. Template class, this transaction template class that simplifies the programmatic transaction demarcation and transaction exception handling is what they are saying. Okay. Template class that simplifies the programmatic transaction demarcation and transaction exception handling will also be simplified. If you go through JDBC way of transaction handling, a traditional JDBC way of transaction handling, it seems to be a little complex. But here it's going to be more straightforward and anyways the programmatic seems to be little coding enabled, but still it's more straightforward and we can understand the flow. But alternatively, we can overcome this transaction template and we can just rely on declarative. We don't need to rely on the transaction template at all. You can just go and focus on using the declarative way of setting up the transaction. Okay. If you have any questions on this, please let me know. Any questions? Okay, so if there are no questions, then we'll move forward. What is the next step that we have to do is, let's go ahead and create one DAO, customer account DAO. I'm going to create a class called customer account DAO. I'm not creating any service, okay, to make it a little simplified. I'm not going through the channel, but still if needed, you can create it. Let's make it quickly because we are running out of time. So customer DAO is going to be marked as at repository. Okay. And down here, the first approach is programmatic transaction management. Programmatic transaction management. Programmatic means we write the lines of code. So for that, the first thing that is required is, yes, of course, we need the JDBC template. So you can auto wire for the JDBC template because you want to communicate with the backend. Then we have transaction template. We need transaction template. Transaction template. And you can make them as at auto wired. We already have the instance cooked up by the IOC container, right? So we are asking the IOC container to auto wire them here. These are the two things. Next step is, let's create a method, public, let's say public void deposit amount. Okay. So the deposit amount, we are going to use the JDBC template to perform the update operation. JDBC. So in the deposit amount, we can give the customer ID, which is int, and the amount that you want to deposit. Okay, you're going to deposit the amount. So JDBC template JDBC template dot update customer account table set amount equals question mark where customer ID, correct? Let's check that once. Customer underscore ID equals question mark. Then as usual, you can just go ahead and create new object of, and within that you are supposed to offer the amount, comma, cust ID variable. Is that correct? Same thing that we saw just now, right? Nothing much complex. Now we need the record already there, right? So what I'm going to do is, first I'm going to insert a manual data, insert into customer underscore account values, customer ID is going to be 101 and the amount is already 1000. So same way, I'm just going to insert some couple more customer details, and this time it's going to be 102 and 103. Right, so let's go ahead, execute them, and let's select them, execute it. There we go. It's all, everything is 1000. That's fine. Initially, when you want to create an account, minimum account that should be the balance should be kept as 1000. So it's already there. Okay, now let's go back. Now I'm going to do this like this. The transaction, assuming that I'm going to do the same update 3 times because we need to simulate the transaction mechanisms, right? So I'm going to simulate 3 times. First time, the amount that I'm going to do will be updated. So let's say if I'm giving it as 2000, it's going to be 2000. Second update, it's going to be 2001 plus 1. Third update, it's going to be 2002. So when you're giving the first time value is going to be 2000, second time it's in this immediately the update another transaction, another update transaction. So there are 3 transactions are processing here, right? There are 3 update statements are processing, update transactions are going to process. But at the end, what I'm going to do is int x equals 10 divided by 0. So this is a manual exception that I'm raising. Please make a note of it. I'm manually raising this exception. This is the way that we can understand it at this point of time. So this will raise to what exception?
Infinite error.
Yeah, it's an infinite, but technically speaking, it is going to raise an
Null pointers.
arithmetic exception.
Arithmetic
Correct?
expression. Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm forcing this exception deliberately. When this exception occurs, means this method is not completed, right? Correct. Or let's say I have a try catch block here. Okay. Try and it'll go to the catch. That's fine. But that's okay. It comes to the catch. But the problem is when there is an exception occurs here, okay, it means something went wrong on this, right? So I want to roll back them. I want to roll back all. Or let's say since the last third one didn't happen, okay, you can even keep it here. Since the third one didn't happen, before completing the third one, there is an exception. I want all the three to be completed successfully when this method is called. But intermittently, I'm deliberately calling the exception with the dummy code like 10 divided by 0, which leads to an arithmetic exception. Will this line of code will get executed? In this flow, will this line of code will get executed? No, because exception occurred here. So when the exception occurred here, immediately the system quits. Or if you have the try block, it will directly jump to whom now? To the catch. But will this line be executed? At any cost, this line is already affected, impacted. So in this situation, I want to roll back them everything. I want to roll back everything. Whatever happened previously should also be rolled back. Correct? Let's see what's going to happen now. If I'm not handling with the transaction, properly, okay, what's going to happen? Let's see. So let's go back to the app. And now let's auto wire. No, now we need to look out for customer account DAO. Correct? Customer account DAO. Customer account DAO. Customer account dot class. That's fine. So from here, I'm going to call. We don't want this. I'm going to invoke the DAO directly instead of going through the service. Okay, you can have a service intermittently if in case you want it. So for whom I'm going to do an update for 101, which is already 1000. I'm going to add. It's actually not like an addition. It'll update. That's okay for now. I'm going to make them as 2000. What is the expected value finally? After this deposit amount is executed successfully, what is the final amount should be there in the table? Forget about the exception. What is the final amount that should be there in the table for 101?
2003.
No.
2001. 2001. Because third only error came.
No. Forget about the exception. I don't have exception. Okay, forget about that. What will be the value that we are expecting? The client is expecting finally, as in this flow. If this query is executed, it's going to be 2000. If this query if this query executes 2000 plus 1, 2001, correct? Later, if this query is executed, it's going to be 2002, not 3, right? See, I'm not doing amount equals amount plus 1. I'm just adding the value, right? Always the amount value is what?
2000.
So 2000 plus 2, what it is? 2002. So my expected output is what? 2002.
2000.
Yeah, 2002. So, but we have an exception here. If there is an exception, what's going to happen? These two statements are anyways going to get executed. Let's see if the output is going to be 2001 or 2000 or 2002. If I don't have this, okay, let me run it without exception. Okay, let's go back to the app. Right now, I'm not using any transactions as such. So it got executed. So let's go back and see. What is the output? 2002. So the logic works fine. That's what I said, right? We should get 2002. Now I'm going to do it for 102. The customer ID 102. 102 is what? The value is 1000. Now, if with an exception, what's going to happen? With an exception, what's going to happen? Whether it's going to be 2002 or 2001 or 2000, let's see. There is an exception. What is the exception that we are facing here? Divided by 0. But what's the backend result is? 2001. So what happened now? Partially the transaction is committed because it has auto commit on. Always auto commit is on. Auto commit is on. Auto commit is on. So automatically it got committed when as and when the update statement is executed, the commit happened. Amount is initially 2000, later again update statement, now it becomes 2001. But why this was not updated? Why this value is not updated for the customer 2? Because we ended up with an arithmetic exception. Yes. Because of this reason, this query didn't execute. That's fine. But these two queries got committed. But actually all should get committed, right? 100% success or 100% failure. But now it seems to be partial success and partial failure. This is not what I wanted. And that's the reason that we need to go for transaction management. Are you getting it? So how do we enforce the transaction management in this use case? Even if the exception occurs, these two transactions should get rolled back. Okay, unless all things, or let's say, for example, unless all three are executed successfully, no transactions should get committed. So how are we going to enforce that? That's the reason that we go for transaction template. So how to use this transaction template? We'll see that. The very first thing is use the transaction template dot you have execute method. Okay, so I'm going to put these transactions into a transactional scope. I'm going to create a transactional boundary or transactional scope in a programmatic manner. In a programmatic manner, I'm going to create a transactional scope. So we have an execute method. Okay, and on top of the calling of the execute method, execute, you can see transaction callback parameters there. The execute method takes transaction callback parameter. So I'm going to create a transaction callback parameter like this. So it's an anonymous class implementation. Okay, it's an anonymous class implementation, and this is going to carry the type as object. This is a flag that we are creating. Internally to it, I'm going to drop in this code. Now you have a boundary. You have a well-defined boundary And inside this boundary, you're supposed to drop it. So this interface is going to carry one method. So what is the method? Do in transaction. It's the same as like row mapper. Okay. But on the call of this execute method, transaction execute method, the transaction callback logic is written. You have a do in transaction. Okay. Scope. Inside the do in transaction, you're supposed to drop in this code. Okay. Inside the do in transaction method, I'm dropping in this 4 lines of code. Now let's embrace it with try and catch. So that we'll get to know how to handle this properly. Catch with arithmetic exception. E dot stack trace. Okay. So what are the steps that I've done here is, this is how programmatically we have to do. You already got the transaction template. Call an execute method. In the execute method, there is a requirement of passing an anonymous class object. But I'm not creating a separate transaction callback anonymous class code. Instead, in the parameter argument, the argument of the method itself, I'm writing the anonymous class. Probably you would have seen in many places. If not, just make a note of it. The anonymous class code is written as an argument for a method. That's absolutely acceptable in Java. Okay. So once you have written an anonymous class for the transaction callback, okay, the method that comes from this interface, like how we had a map row method from the row mapper interface, the same way transaction callback is going to have a do in transaction method. The do in transaction method have to be overridden, and it takes a parameter called transaction status. This transaction status is going to be used for specific purpose. I'll come to this point a bit later. So right now I have the scope written. Now what I'm going to do is, coming into this, okay, coming into this, I'm going to say we are in need of this status here, right? So we have the status and we need to call status dot set rollback only. So what it does is, okay, set rollback only, meaning is it will roll back when once the exception occurs using the status, transaction status. I'm just demarcating the set rollback only, which will roll back everything. For this demonstration purpose, make a note of it. For this demonstration purpose alone, I'm removing this code and dropping it down here. So the meaning is, what does this mean is, there is a transaction boundary have been set. Within this boundary, if any transaction fails within this boundary scope, because as an exception occurs, all 3 would have got executed, right? All 3 would have got executed. After that only, I'm raising the exception. After executing all the 3 update statements only, I'm executing the exceptional statement. This time it will come to the catch. When it comes to the catch, I'm forcing it to set rollback only. If it comes to the catch, set rollback only. What the set rollback only will do is, it will roll back all the transaction that was there inside the scope. Transaction 3, transaction 2, transaction 1, all will be rolled back. That's what the set rollback only means. But we have something called save point. You would have heard about the save point concept in database, right? We can also achieve with save point. I'll come to the save point shortly, but temporarily, let's understand that I'm doing a thorough rollback. With this set of logic, okay, if I'm not going to do a rollback, what's going to happen? So let's say for this 101, okay, I'm going to punch in a value of 3000 this time. Okay, so expected is 3000 and 3000 and 3000, 3001, 3002, right? So let's execute this. Let's see if there is any exception. So there's a divide by 0. Okay, it's for 102. Okay, I've given for 102. Yeah, it's for 102. So 3002. So what happened now? Is there any rollback happened? For 102 record, because I've given in app the customer ID is 102. So for 102 record, all the 3 update statements have happened. There is an exception. It comes to the catch. Is there a rollback happening? No, there's no rollback happening. It seems to be like there is no point in having this transaction because it is not doing a proper rollback. It's we who have to do this rollback. Otherwise, it will do an auto commit automatically. So we have to do the status. You have to use the status, transaction status dot set rollback only, so that it will roll back all the 3 if there is an exception. So let's say, for example, I'm going to set it for 101 this time, and it's going to be 4000. Okay. Now when I execute this, before I didn't give this line, right? Now I have given the line for 101. Let's see whether 2002 is going to be there or 4002 is going to be there. So still there is an exception. If I refresh, you can see 2002 is not changed to 4002. It would have got changed, but not committed to the database, right? It's not committed because only when the complete transaction scope is coming out, it will auto commit and then it will come out. But now when it comes to the catch, I'm saying, hey, roll it back. Please roll it back. All the transactions, you roll it back. So the entire transaction got rolled back safely because there is an exception. Now what I'm saying is I want certain transaction to be rolled back, certain transaction to be saved, and only specific transaction to be rolled back. In that case, we can again use the status. Okay, and in the status you can use the save point option. Set create save point, and this create save point, look at the return type of the create save point method. I'm creating a save point. The save point method returns an object. Okay, it's returning an object, so I want to typecast it to the specific vendor type, which is MySQL transaction. So I'm going to use transaction. It's going to be okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a MySQL save point object, and temporarily it is non-referenced, so it is just null right now. MySQL save point. This save point object is what I'm going to use it as a flag here. Save point equals typecasted to MySQL save point, because we have to typecast them to the exact type. because it's returning an object, right? So we need to downcast it to a MySQL save point. Okay, so that is the meaning. So yes, it has to be given within the method. Okay, so we are doing a save point. It's a flag. It's like creating a flag. So I have a flag here, save point, and it's MySQL database oriented save point type. And for Oracle, you have the same. For DB2, you might be having the same. This time what I'm going to do is I'm not going to say set rollback. Instead, I'm going to say status dot rollback to save point. And what is the object that we created? Save point. So you can create multiple objects, save point 1, save point 2, save point 3, multiple save points, and you can roll it back to that specific save point. Don't do the overall rollback. Instead, you do a rollback only to the save point. So what happens is when I have a save point flag kept here, till this place, the update operations will get committed. After this transaction will not get committed. You're getting it? This is not safeguarded with the save point.
Even we have rollback also, up to that it will commit us.
Yes, roll back to save point. Yes, of course. I'm rolling back to this point, right? To this point means it is this point. This point is what is going to be rolled back. Before the save point, whatever operation happened will not get rolled back.
Suppose I'm having this first template, next line I am giving this save point means first time what value it changes, it only save.
Correct. So you will have a different save point object there to identify flag, right? You should have here save point 2, and here you will be having save point 1 in the before the line. You're getting it? So the understanding here is save point is like a flag. To which flag you want to roll back, you need to mention here in the rollback to save point method. If it is a set rollback only, it will only roll back the complete transaction, irrespective of whether you have the save point or not. Okay. If I do this, what will happen? What will happen? Even though I have given a flag here, what will happen? It will roll back all the transaction, even though I have a save point flag, because you didn't mention till what point I have to roll back. That's the reason we have this special method called rollback to save point method, and that method will carry the flag which you have mentioned here as a parameter. So it will go till this point and roll back all the transactions that have been executed, and the previous transactions before this save point will all be committed. So let's see, according to this input, 101 4000, before nothing happened because all got rolled back. For 101 it's still 2002. So what is the expected value now? According to this scenario, you just look at the logic and say what is the expected output?
4001.
Yes. So here the transaction is 4000, correct? And here the transaction is going to be 4001, and here the transaction is going to be 4002. But the save point roll back till what? Till this point, correct? Before this have to be committed. So expected output is 4001. The final updated output should be 4001. Let's see if that's going to happen or not. Perfect. 4001. And it's not 4002 because your rollback have happened till this place. If with this, if I give rollback, now what is the output?
4000.
4001.
Update all how, yeah, it will be as it is to the previous 4001. Okay, let's say 5000. To differentiate it, I'm giving 5000. So what is that we are expecting as a client? What the client is expecting? 5000.
1001.
Yeah, 5001. Or maybe client might expect it can be 5002 also. But still in the code level, there is a save point and there is a rollback. A complete rollback is expected. So what is the final? Technically, what is the final expected output?
4000.
It's only 4000. Yeah, 4001 only should be there. It should not be 5000, neither 5000, nor 5001, nor 5002. it should be coming back to 4001 only. Let's see that. Because all gets rolled back. See, if I refresh, it's still 4001. But if you give this specific save point operations, then if you run it, $5,001, not 5,002, because I've rolled back till that place. If I give 6,000, and if I don't have any exceptions at all, no exception at all, it will never come to the cache, even though you have a save point or not, doesn't matter. It never comes into the cache. If I execute this, what is the expected output?
6002.
Exactly, 6002. And that's what is happening. Now this is a well-equipped code for handling the transactions. Till this knowledge is more sufficient for you to tackle the interviews. Okay. Beyond this, there might be more complexity of code that might come in, but we don't need to go to that depth until there is a real-time use case comes into the picture. But the main components that you have to understand here is the transaction template. You create an executional context boundary with the transaction callback object, and internally you can have the method called doInTransaction, which takes the parameter of transaction status. This transaction status is actually referring as a flag for creating a save point and as well as for doing a rollback. And roll back to the specific save point. That is the meaning. Whatever we have written here is completely programmatic transaction. This is how a programmatic transaction would look like. Is that clear?
Sir, if the interviewer
yes, please.
asks what is about transaction managed, shall we tell about do transaction, the scope and all boundary of the transaction? This is enough to convey the transaction management in interview.
In interview, yeah. Yes. So if it's a programmatic, you have to brief. The programmatic transaction happens with the help of transaction template. Transaction template is internally bounded with the transaction manager. What the transaction template does is it creates a scope or a boundary for the set of transactions that you want to safeguard. And in that boundary, the transaction will be transaction boundary will be enabled. They will keep monitoring your transaction. And if anything goes wrong within the transaction, it's your turn to roll back, call the rollback. So it will go to the cache and look at the rollback, and the transaction boundary or the flag will look out for the rollback, and it will roll back the transaction. If there is a save point occurring and you have rolled back to that specific save point, the transaction boundary will go to that specific save point and roll back all the transaction, and the earlier transactions will be auto committed. And this is what is happening to track the flag of the save point and to perform the transaction rollback. We have to maintain the transaction status.
Sir, I have one doubt.
So you can see a definition here, representation of the status of transaction. What the status is. Is that a rollback status or is that a save point? So what it is? It will have the specific flag or the status that will be maintained. And that status is what which we need to use it in order to successfully manage the transaction. Yes, please. What is your doubt?
Sir, suppose with our knowledge, if anything happens means we will use that rollback and it will go to the previous position. Okay.
Exactly.
How to handle the save point, sir? How to handle the save point?
No, you
save points is
you can understand the logic here. See, it depends on, it's not update here. Okay, it can be insert, it can be update, or it can be delete. It can be complex query, complex update query. We don't know. Okay, there might be 2 or 3 or there might be 15 transactions. So you know the logic as a developer that which set of transaction need to be committed and which set of transaction need to be rolled back, that you can decide.
Okay. Based on
the decision is depending on the logic that we are going to write. Yes. Okay, unless and until if we are not doing the save point and the rollback to save point operations, then obviously it's going to be not of a use in maintaining the transaction, right? So it's we who have to make the transactions to be handled explicitly in the coding wise, because it's programmatic. But ideally, using a save point is more of a rare scenario, okay, because we will be isolating the transactions with different methods. Each method will take care of a different transaction, and that's why we go for declarative transactions. So declarative transactions will have more of a method-oriented bounded transaction mechanisms. But still, since it's programmatic, you have the approach of using save point. So you can decide in which use case till which transactions you want to commit, or till which transaction you want to roll it back. That you can ultimately take in control. Okay. If it is a declarative transaction, so I have a method declared here as 1. I'm going to copy this 3, put it here. I'm not giving any transaction, nothing. Just everything is there inside to this. But actually, this is not the way how we write it. This is not the correct real-time logic of code, but for understanding purpose, I'm just defining it. Now, this method will be called by someone, right? Here we need actually a service flow. Okay, so we can create one service for understanding this logic. So in the service, I'm going to create new class called customer account service. And the customer account service, you can drop in this at service. And inside this, again, you can have the same style of method. Okay, and this method will in turn call your customer DAO. So at auto wired, you can say customer account DAO, and you are ready to have this object in place to call the method. So customer account DAO dot deposit amount and forward the value. Why I'm doing this is the real-time way how we actually approach to the DAO class sitting from the service. So the service class method is the caller of the DAO. So from the calling point, I'm going to enable an annotation called @transactional. Okay, I'm enabling a scope called @transactional. You're getting it? So this @transactional scope, the @transactional annotation, will automatically enable the transaction mechanism. Will automatically enable the transaction mechanism and keep following the transaction. This will have multiple parameters. Okay, this will have multiple parameters. Like for example, read only. So read only is false because this transaction is not a select statement. Okay, so read only parameter is false. Then you have no rollback for. Okay, rollback for or no rollback for. So let's say rollback for. I'm saying rollback for only if it is an arithmetic exception. Okay, it's only for arithmetic exception you need to perform the rollback of the transaction. If it is any other exception, don't do the rollback. Rollback for arithmetic exception alone. The next, you have your propagation levels. So propagation levels, you'll be having the option mandatory, you need a transaction, never, you need a transaction, not supported, required, requires new, supports, and nested. These are different variety of propagation of transaction flags that we have. So let's say I want always to be a required transaction. Okay, I'm going to use required. So what this required transaction says, support a current transaction, create a new one if one exists. Support a current transaction, create a new one if none exists. If there is no transaction, you create a transaction boundary. If the transaction is already there, you make use of the transaction. Okay, so that is what this line of statement means. So like which every flag will have its own logic of transaction statements. Okay, so at this point of time, it's like saying that support a current transaction, create a new one if none exists. If there's no transaction at all, you better create a new one and then follow the transaction scope. Or if someone else have already created, when this method is called by someone else before and that has a transaction coming in, then you follow the transaction to proceed further. And that's what the propagation means. There are different variety of propagations. If you go and see the definition of each and every propagation type, you'll get to know what propagation have to be used for in which scenario. It depends on the use case. So now I'm going to call 1, deposit amount 1. But to activate this transaction, okay, if I just run this, let's say I go back to this and instead of customer DAO, I'm going to call customer service. Customer account service. Customer account service. Right now, I don't want this. Customer account service dot deposit amount 1, and this time it's going to be for 103, and the value I'm going to give it as 7,000. So what happens here is for 103 it should be, the value should change. Right now it's 1,000, but if you go to the deposit 1, okay, we have all these piece of code. Okay, let's say for example I'm going to raise an exception int y equals 20 divided by 0. So that is an arithmetic exception. In this, there is an arithmetic exception. If there is an arithmetic exception, you roll back it. Roll back for only the arithmetic exception. There is a meaning. Is that clear? So now let's go ahead and execute and see what's going to happen. This is not having much of a code other than just a one-liner of annotation. That is a divide by 0. You can see 103 is not changed because it completely got rollbacked. Now, if I don't have this exception at all, if I execute this, it got executed, no exception right now. Still running. Yeah. Now the problem is actually the thing is it is not falling into the scope of this transaction. It's because, let's say, I'll tell you what's the issue. Actually, earlier it didn't do the rollback. I'm sorry. Okay, it didn't really do the rollback. Nothing happened actually. Okay, the reason is even though we have this transactional being enabled, read only false, and everything is fine, but looking at this piece of code in the configuration class, we have the transaction template, we have the transaction manager, but it's not activated for annotation based. So there's no point in having that scope. Hello. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, sir. Audible, sir.
Yeah. Yes. In the configuration, we have to say at enable transaction management. So what this does is this annotation will enable Spring annotation driven transaction management. Okay. But the question is why the entire commit didn't happen? Yeah, because the transaction management is enabled. Anyways, let's see that. So I'm enabling the transaction management. Sitting from the app, we are calling the customer account service deposit amount 1. Going to the customer service, customer DAO is calling the deposit amount 1. And going to the customer DAO, you have deposit amount 1 with the update operations. Okay. So now if this is without exception, okay. What is a mistake? At repository. This method is not getting called. Let's debug it. This method itself is not getting called. No, it's called. Yeah. Inside deposit amount 1. But so it's coming in. Rollback for arithmetic exception class. Rollback for arithmetic exception class. Okay. Propagation required. It's correct.
Value of deposit amount 1, sir.
Yeah, value I've given that, right? It's 103 7,000. So expect is 7,003. It's not getting committed. So enable transaction management is in place. We have the transaction manager, we have the template, everything is in place. Just a one-liner of a transaction management. No, it's a single transaction, right? So let's see this. The single transaction gets committed. transactional, read only, rollback for arithmetic exception. What's an issue? Okay, let's say it's not getting committed. Okay.
Sir, in pom.xml, do we need to add any XMLs for specific for this? Or
No,
it's coming
transaction is
from
already there. We don't need to add anything.
an external just okay.
Because otherwise we would have got an error here in using those annotations, right? So I don't have any problem in using that transactional. That
Okay.
is not a concern. Roll back for just a second. This is correct. Roll back for, no rollback for class name, rollback for, no rollback for required transaction manager. Okay. Transactional.
It's declarative one.
Yeah, this is a declarative one. We are just declaring the scope for this deposit amount is already marked as at service. It should be at service, right? Yeah, it's at service and customer D80 repository. It's fine. It's executing this method. This statement is executed, but it's not getting committed. It should be auto committed because there's no exception. There's no exception. It should auto commit. But the problem is The transaction manager is not getting activated at enable transaction management. I have the same code working here in this inventory service. Just we'll have a look at it here. Customer DAO. Deposit programmatic. Okay. Associated template. Repository. That's all correct. Deposit service. Not this one. Customer account service. We have this propagation required transactional deposit amount. Deposit amount 1. And in the configuration, I have the same at enable. Okay, let me try doing this. One or three. It's happening actually. Sorry guys. Okay. 7,000. Yeah. Okay. So actually we should have this happens because I reinitiated this executional flow of the command. Okay, so that's why it's internally got refresh. I was only trying to do a refresh here for this flow. Let me see if this works. My understanding is correct. This should work. Let me keep it there itself. And going back to the app, this time it's 14,000 or 15,000. Let's execute this. So on top of executing, we should have this. Yeah, it's happening. 15,000. I don't know. Might be the session that has been maintained is not reflecting from the ID. That's the reason, I guess. So it's working fine. The only thing is going back to the customer account service. Now we need to do a rollback. So that is an arithmetic exception. Customer account service says rollback for arithmetic exception. And the input value is going to be now 20,000. Actually, initially it's 15,000. Let's see what's going to happen. There is an exception. You can see the 15,000 still exists. Okay, it's not reflected to 20. The reason is the exception is occurring. That's the type of arithmetic exception. If you don't want this to be rollback for this exception, then you have the option called no rollback. No rollback for, okay. don't roll back for arithmetic exception. That is the meaning. Okay. Any other exception, it's fine. But if it's an arithmetic exception, please don't roll back. So before you saw that it was 15,000. Now let me execute this. There's an exception that's going to occur. But will it commit or not? That's a question. Of course, it got committed. Why it got committed? Because my constraint says no rollback for arithmetic exception. That is the meaning. Okay. So the thing is, your transactions are working fine. So let's enable this. And let's go back to app and modify this to 30,000. Sometimes because of an application issue, we might be revolving around in same place to figure out the problem. So 30,000, 30,002. So 30,002 it's coming because 30,000, 30,001 and 2. Okay. Even though the exception occurs, the committing happens because the constraint says clearly that you do not roll back if it's an arithmetic exception. If it's something else, if some other exception occurs, then literally the commit, the rollback would have happened. So now what I'm going to say is you better roll back for arithmetic exception. So if it's rollback for arithmetic exception, and this time it's going to be 50,000, sure that this 30,002 will not get changed to 50,002. It should not, as per my understanding. Yes, of course, it didn't change. Okay. Coming back to the DAO, let me not have this exception at all. But if such exception occurs, you please roll it back. But anyways, the arithmetic exception is not going to occur. So the transaction is going to be committed. It should be committed. And it should be 50,002 instead of 30,000. Yes, of course, 50,002. The session was not maintained properly in the workbench tool. That's why it was not reflected properly. So this is the way that you do a transactional handling. But the one thing that you have to look out here is the save point operations. Okay. You are having a trouble in save point. Save point flow will not be enabled if it's automated transaction manager implementation through declarative. Okay, so that's why to be more precise, to be more complex, you go for programmatic. Otherwise, don't do multiple transactions like this. You better do a multiple method calls for each update. There should be a separate method call. This method will call another method. That method will call another method for another transaction. If any of the method fails, then that particular method's rollback can be happened, and that propagation flow can be maintained here. In every flow, you can keep maintaining the propagation level, whether you want required or you want to be supported. That we can track. But save point won't work. So you isolate them. Isolation is something very important. You isolate it into a separate method, and you go to a call of each and every method synchronously, having the transaction to be a followed up transaction, or it should be a new transaction that you can decide based on the propagation. So that is one drawback that we have. It's not like a drawback actually. It is the way how it has to be implemented when it is a declarative transaction. But our hassles of work is not there. You're not writing any of these lines of code. It's just a matter of one liner of statement. Now the next question is, can we have this line directly applied? Can we take this at transactional and put it here itself in the DAO method? Yes, of course you can do it. That is also possible. You don't need to put a service and then in the caller you don't need to put it. You can directly put the transaction or apply the transactional scope here in the deposit amount one method itself in the DAO class itself. You need not carry them in the service, but in real time, this is how it happens. Service, who's the caller of the DAO, where the actual transaction is going to happen. Let the caller be initiated with the transaction first. Let the caller come in with transaction. That is what I'm saying. Okay. Before even you are going to execute the transaction method in the DAO, you're coming to this transaction method itself with transactional scope. That is what it means. Or you can go to the method and there you can create a transactional scope through the declarative also by using our transactional. Either way, it's fine. But as they usually say, the caller should go with the transactional so that you can have more control over the transaction by using the propagation method. Okay, so the important thing is the propagation method have to be noted down, and marking this as a read only. Now there's a different exception that will occur. Prepared statement callback. The reason says connection is read only. You mark this transaction to be what? Read only, but what you are trying to perform is update operation. So it raises an exception. Connection is read only. Modification is not allowed. You're not permitted to do a modification when the read only is set to true. But in this case, it's not a read only, right? So it's an update operation which you are performing. So it has to be enabled to be false. Now you can note down what is the need of a read only. Read only means the transaction goes in a read only purpose like select statement, but don't give it for the purpose of updation. That's stopping you temporarily. This is during the testing time, they will switch on and switch off. Okay, the read only property is mainly used during the testing time. Okay, they can switch on and switch off the transaction according to their requirement. Okay, you can control it. So that's the purpose of this read only mode. And you can roll back for, or you can no rollback for operation. Multiple classes you can list out because it's an array. You can keep giving as many number of classes as a constraint to say any of these exception occurs alone you roll back, otherwise you just commit it. Even though if some, let's say for example, array index out of bounds exception occurs, but you mentioned arithmetic exception. Will it roll back for array index out of bound exception? No. It will roll back only when the arithmetic exception occurs. You're getting it? So no rollback for arithmetic exception. If any other exception occurs, rollback will happen. But if arithmetic exception occurs alone, it will not roll back. That is the understanding of this rollback for and no rollback for property. And you have a propagations where we have multiple propagation properties out here to represent whether you need a transaction or you don't need a transaction, but still you want to create a new transaction, or you just want to go with the existing transaction, or whatever mode of transactions or propagations that is required. That is what the propagation is all about. So if you have any questions on this, please let me know. So because of the session problem in the MySQL workbench, we had this issue. I should have hit the execution button to reload the session. That I didn't do. Anyways, it's a learning for us. Good learning. But thing works fine. So I brought this at enable transaction management. That's something important. Okay. In the DB configuration, at enable transaction management is important. Now what will happen if I don't have a transaction manager? We'll see this also. I'll just take another 2 more minutes. Sorry for taking more time. I don't have a transaction manager at all, but I've just given an at transaction management. What will happen? Let's execute this and see. Template will be impacted. Template is only for programmatic. Okay, we don't need this template anyways. This template is not required if it's a declarative. I guess there we are doing a template in the customer DAO, correct? We are auto wiring for this. Let's comment on this. Comment on the at water wired. Yeah. Okay, so now if I execute this, why I'm showing you this demo is it clearly states there is no availability of transaction manager. So what does it mean? Even though if it is an annotation based transaction, declarative transaction, what is mandate required is transaction manager need to be created. We need to create the transaction manager. Without this, even the declarative transaction won't work. Either a declarative transaction or a programmatic transaction, you need transaction manager. That is a meaning. Okay. Without a transaction manager, you cannot kickstart your transactional scope. So I commented out the transaction manager. Quickly it says that you need a transaction manager. Otherwise, it's practically not possible. No qualifying transaction manager available. And that's the reason we have to create this manually and configure the transaction manager. Post configuring this, you execute this, it will smoothly execute the code. It works. But if it's a programmatic transaction, what else is required? transaction template is required because we need to programmatically thread out the code to control the transaction. Okay, but the most important entity out here is the transaction manager. There is a meaning. Is that clear? If it is a Spring Boot, if this were a Spring Boot application, pretty simple. You don't need to do any of these transaction manager code and nothing is required. Everything is auto created automatically and it is available. You just do the annotation part alone and ensure you are enable transaction management alone is in place. We don't need to even create a transaction management. I'm sorry, we don't need to even create a transaction manager. Why? Because Spring Boot will auto create that. That's the power of Spring Boot. Whatever we have done here solely in the code configurations will all be eliminated and it will be automatically taken care by the Spring Boot environment itself. Okay, so once if you get a chance to study Spring Boot, probably if I come up with a course there, you'll be synced with that. Okay, so I'll be explaining that this part is not required, but you're well aware that there are two variants of transaction management that can be done. One is programmatic, another one is declarative. If it's a declarative, steps are very clear. Of course, 100% you need a transaction manager and you need to enable transaction management. Otherwise, it won't perform the transaction. And you need to use the transactional boundary in your calling code and provide your most important properties out here. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, we are good to go today.
Sir, in the customer account DAO, there is a method, right? Deposit amount.
Yes.
Deposit amount. The older one. In this line number 47, you created this method, right? Do in transaction. What is a shortcut, sir? How to create that? Yeah, that line.
This line this line if you want to create
clip shortcut.
Yeah, this is just control space.
All right. Oh, okay.
So when you the auto and here it is there, right? So you can just click that. It'll automatically put the code.
Similarly for results set also same, right? Similar type.
Exactly.
Okay. Got it.
The row mapper also you can do it. Map row method. You can control space. Map row will come.
Got it, sir. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other doubts? So you got to go through this video again, and otherwise it seems to be like little 3 hours of journey, right? So a lot of learnings that we had. Next week it's going to be much more interesting because next week we are going to step into web application. But still we have two more concepts to be discussed here. One is batch update. Another one is the procedural calls, how we can do it with Spring Jdbc. But that I can able to accommodate along with the web application itself. So I hope I plan for 24 hours of session, so 4 weeks, but I don't think I'll be eligible to complete it in 4 weeks. So if not, one more additional week will be taken. Okay, that's for your information. Yeah. So any other question? Because I don't want to force them or rush them by just completing the course. That's not what I wanted to do in my personal course. So even if time is taken, it's okay. But I want to impart all the knowledge.
This is my personal request, sir. Give some simple exercise with method wise of practicing Spring.
Simple exercises for what concepts?
Anything, sir. Today some transactional manager you did. So this thing.
Okay. I'll try to work around on that because I don't have any snippet of exercises. Probably if you ask me some use case, it'll be a big use case which you can work around. But I don't have the options for a small snippet of exercise codes. But if I found it, I'll share it on the group so that you can start working on that aspect.
Because when I'm practicing your exercise, if anything happens, means my mind automatically go to your project. What is in that? So my mind will copy paste that.
You should not do. Yes, of course. That you see. First thing is you need to simulate this for the American Express, which you need to do it by yourself.
Yes,
you should not look at my code. You can look at it. That's first time. You don't need to copy paste it, but at least understand it. Go back to your code and type it and then practice. So that you can take one more use case for the same. Probably I can get some use case. I'll try to work around on that. But what I say is please don't just first time you can import it and then you run it and then see if everything works fine. Fine, okay. Next time you create your own project and try to apply all these codes, whatever I have done, by looking at my code. Third time you will automatically get it. So, but ultimately you should not do a copy paste. Don't do that. 100 times you can see right from the beginning till the end what I'm doing.
Yes, sir.
I'm just typing it, right? Even though it's a painstaking event, that's fine for me because even I'm doing it 1,000 times, I'll be able to follow up with my code. Okay, if you just copy paste, you cannot follow up your own code. Okay, that's very important. Yeah.
Use
See,
cases we
actually,
can use ticket booking, railway ticket booking, movie ticket booking, like that we can use, right? Use cases.
yes, yes, yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Similar like transaction.
I have the use cases. I have the real time. It's not a real time, probably a kind of practice use cases I have, but that's are pretty lengthier. Only when we complete the web application logic, you will have those option to be used, right?
Right, sir.
So once you learn the web application, you will start designing your web pages, and then you will apply each and every controller part, and then you will apply exception handlings, you will apply transactions, you will apply database interactions. Everything will come into the sync.
Anyway,
So
core
that's
will
why I
be
was
this
waiting
one.
for that.
Core
Yeah.
will be this one. Input alone will be coming from the front end, from the web.
Exactly. The core logic is this. Yes, of course, the core logic is this.
It
The
won't
front end
change.
change. Right now, we are doing the front end through console, right? I enter here. But in the web application, what you can have some Angular application in the front end or JSP application in the front end. You will have some set of text boxes. You have some pages, submit it. Logic is all same. The backend logic will all be the same. Okay. So that time, yes, of course, the use case can really help you. But I'll try to see. Let me see if I could catch up with some snippet of exercises. Then sure, because there will be no much of exercises for snippet based. Okay, that's the problem. Unless and until we fine tune it and we try to create it manually. Okay. Yeah. Any other question? Do anyone have any other question? So you have to go through one round of workaround. Only then you'll be able to catch up this. So try to use that. Use the recordings. So I'll be sharing the recording. Please do read them. But the practice. See, I'm conducting these type of session. It's not just to earn something. Okay, this is the very first time I'm just coming up with some commercial courses which I haven't done in my life at all because I do it for free. I usually do it for free, and people that's what, because I am more bounded to education. Okay, this is the very first time I'm just doing it a try, and this is not going to. It's not for my running of my life. Okay, it's just for some to create some interest on the commercial part. That's all. The reason I come up with these kind of courses often, even during this pandemic period, is because I want to be in touch with the technology. Because I forget things. You're getting it? I forget things because I meddle with more projects, different technologies, and I forget here. So to keep in touch, I always constantly keep in touch because now you can see I came to know that there's an obsolete method query for object is obsolete and we have a replacement for that. But quickly I could able to grasp what is needed for that. I've given the inputs. That is something which I gained throughout these a number of years of experience. So I can tackle that part dynamically. But the thing is, I want to be in touch with the technology. So when I teach people, I'm in touch with the technology. So probably if you want to be in touch with, either you have to keep doing projects more on relevant to the technology, or you have to teach people out. That's the only way that we can keep in touch with the technology. Otherwise, after 6 months or 8 months, whatever you have learned will go obsolete. You cannot recall them. Okay, so that's the main intention for me to launch these kind of courses. So commercial is secondary for me. Okay, that's why I'm not prompting people to make the payment initially, right? So I complete the course, and then if you're okay with the course, you pay it, or else you don't need to pay. It's up to you. I don't mind because I'm gaining a lot throughout this course. That's what I feel for. Okay, so why I'm saying this, Gyan, is because you have to do this in your life. So you can teach to couple of colleagues or 3 or 4 people out there. Keep in touch with the technology. Yeah, so I'll stop here. Anyways, I've taken much of time, 30 minutes additional. So if you have any questions, we can. Else, we'll close for the day of this week, and we'll catch it up in the next week. Probably this week, Wednesday or Thursday, I'll come up for a query session for 1 hour again. Things are fine? Okay. So thank you so much for your time, and stay safe. We'll connect up next week. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, bye.